Hi there everybody, my name is Will and welcome to the channel, the LDN Studio ID, where we look at video games development and design for 2D games. So in this particular video, what I want to do is actually to demonstrate and to run through the source code of how to do something very simple in UWP. And that is how to display a bitmap image onto the screen. Simple, but yet fundamental as a concept if we want to render our games. Especially utilizing UWP, WPF, so on and so forth. But we're going to be focusing on UWP, and I also want to talk a little bit about why I think that UWP gets some bad press when really it has a lot to offer, I believe. And I'm going to go a little bit into that towards the end of the video. But for now, let me just show you the result. So this is just a graphic, and I'm just going to move it to the top of the screen. And as you can see, simple graphic, loaded as a bitmap image, or it's in an image container, better said, but it's being rendered via some bitmap libraries that we're going to go into. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this window. Where am I? Using OBS, still getting used to this. Excellent. So let's jump straight into the code. So I'm going to switch to Visual Studio. And I will probably zoom in a little bit just so that you can see the code a little better. I'll just wait for Visual Studio to close the debug session. I'm using Visual Studio 2019, and I highly recommend moving forward that 2019 is your option of choice. However, you can still use 2017 edition, Community Edition, at the least for UWP application development. So let me just maybe see if I can zoom in a little bit. And I'll just see how that looks. Okay, that's not too bad. Okay, so jumping straight into the code. We're going to start with the main page. And I will probably have to zoom out a little bit just so we can see a little bit more of the screen. Actually, if I put the Solution Explorer a little bit out of the way, it will help a little bit. So there are two particular ways that I'm going to go into in order to render bitmap graphics onto the screen. The first example is going to be based on the Win2D API. And the Win2D API is utilizes the direct 2D assembly in order to render 2D graphics onto the screen. But it's a highly abstracted it's a high level abstraction in terms of the classes that you utilize at the UWP level. So it's a very useful tool, a very useful class for if you want to maybe not get so too deep into lower level stuff, especially with what UWP has to offer. With DirectX wrapper support, writing your DirectX code in C++, wrapping it, and then utilizing it in UWP. I'm going to go a little bit into that towards the end of the video. And as they say on the Win2D documentation, it utilizes the power of Direct2D and integrates seamlessly with XAML and core window. And that's what we're going to be looking at. And it does work rather well, I must say. So what I have here, if I bring your attention to my XAML, I'll see if the design is loaded. Actually, there wasn't really much of a point going to the XAML because I'm doing most of this programmatically anyway. But actually, it's quite a good thing that I brought you here because there's some prerequisites that we need to take care of. And on that topic, as we're waiting for the designer to load prerequisites, housekeeping. UWP is one of those platforms whereby I was quite put off by it at the beginning because of what seemed like bugginess, lagginess, and I was just put off. I prefer WPF. I found there are different things that kind of trigger obscure errors, but if you go about the housekeeping very carefully, you will be able to actually get through most of them. One of the issues that I found with UWP was utilizing third-party libraries via the NuGet store, which just didn't really bode well with UWP, such as the SlimDX library, which I personally really love, especially with WPF, as it gave me really great abstraction to DirectX functionality so that I could not only potentially render hardware accelerator graphics in WPF, but I could also have input support for Microsoft controllers onto my WPF applications. And I wanted this for UWP. However, excuse me. However, what I found was that in UWP, it was having clashes. I was getting obscure errors and things just weren't moving forward. And after over an hour, maybe 2 hours, I don't know how long it was, but it was quite a while, of trying to get to the root, I just thought, okay, I'm not going to use this assembly. I'm not going to utilize this library because obviously there are issues that still need to be worked out. I found the safest bet is to stick with as close to the core native libraries that are already offered. Maybe just downloading the, I think it's the, I forgot what it's called. Let's have a look in the Nougat store. It's like the .NET library or something like that, which I believe that they recommend that you download as a kind of prerequisite, as you might be needing some of the functionality. Yeah, it's the Microsoft .NET Core Universal Windows Platform, which I have installed. I think it's pending an update. I'm not 100% sure, but for now, this is probably one of the most important NuGet updates you'll probably need for UWP moving forward. So going back to the main page, I did all the housekeeping, and I'm sticking to basically what is essentially what's given to me at the start. But you're also, for this situation, you're gonna need system.threading.tasks, Microsoft.graphics.canvas, and Microsoft Graphics Canvas UI XAML. Now I'm gonna leave a link to my research and my document and the documentation that I found, linked to how I was able to work out how to make this all work, so you know how to get any namespaces that are not already available, so on and so forth. So first, you want to create a Canvas bitmap, and the Canvas bitmap is part of the Microsoft Graphics Canvas namespace, the Canvas bitmap class. Excuse me, and I've just called this widget bitmap. And you also want a Canvas control, which I've called widget. Now, don't worry about the sprites class too much. That's for example 2, where I actually just use the graphics.imaging namespace to do the same task, supposedly. We'll get back to that. So anyway, I've created a method called source bitmap images. Or sorry, source bitmap graphics rather. Then I take the widget, which is actually my Canvas control, and I create 2 events. Well, should I say I create an event handler, as you can see here, and all the source code I will leave in the description so that you can have a look at your own leisure. But there are some things you need to take into account when kind of routing this code, because it's not as straightforward sometimes as just copying and pasting. In fact, I didn't really copy and paste the majority of this. I typed it up because it helped me to understand what was going on, even though I relied a lot on the Microsoft documentation. But I still typed the majority of it myself. But there were still obscure things I had to take into account, UWP acting up and stuff, so just to be on the safe side. So you want a typed event handler, give it the appropriate parameters, as you can see. Now, it's probably worth noting that on your XAML, you want to declare or instantiate, basically add the namespace, the Canvas namespace, as such, using Microsoft.graphics.canvasui.xaml. It says that Canvas is unnecessary here, but I would just include everything just to be on the safe side, and add the unloaded event handler as well. So this event page underscore unloaded, and you should be good to go. I've made a grid called viewport grid, and this actually has a player image, which is to do with example 2, but we'll get back to that. So once you've done that, make sure you make the widget, or in your whatever you name your Canvas control to be, make it a child of your main grid, or whatever whatever container you're using. I'm using grid, which I called viewport grid, and I'm adding the widget. Otherwise, you won't see the canvas. You won't see the image, which is what happened to me at first. I had to add the bitmap graphic via the widget onto the viewport grid. So you want to make your method for your page unloaded and just give it these functionality. Now, this is quite an important method. Widget underscore draw is called upon in another method, in another functionality, but we're going to create this anyway right now first, since we're here. And it takes a Microsoft Graphics Canvas UI XAML Canvas Controller as a sender, which is basically just the widget, if I'm not mistaken. And the Microsoft Graphics Canvas UI XAML Canvas Draw Events args, it accesses the members of that class. And then from args, you want to call the drawing session property and give it the appropriate parameters. So this is just the dimensions of your graphic. I gave it the widget bitmap, which is the canvas bitmap, which I made up above. And I gave it a height and width of 200, 200, so it's like a square. So I think the float X and float Y is to do with, let's have a look. I think it's to do with the dimensions. Let's just read that. Draws an image. Okay, it doesn't really say much, but I believe that's just, it's either the position or it's actually the size. It could just be the position. Anyway, this is also important. You want to make an async task method called widget underscore create resource async. Give it a canvas control as the sender. Again, it's the canvas control that we're using to contain the bitmap graphic. That will be the sender. And then you want to call this functionality. So this widget bitmap, which is your canvas bitmap, give it an await call to canvas bitmap.load async. And what this is, again, copy and pasting won't really help too much here because this is for my own directory. But the image you want to display, I've put an image called thumbnail.png on my working directory. So that just means that I can access the working directory of my project and store assets, store images and stuff that I want there. And you can call that for yourself via app domain, current domain, base directory, plus concatenating that with the name, the file name of your file. And then finally, you want to create another method called widget underscore create resources, which takes a Microsoft Graphics Canvas UI XAML Canvas Control rather as the sender, and a Microsoft Graphics Canvas UI Canvas create resource event args, and you will access the classes within the members within this class via your parameter. Then call your parameter in your method, call track async action, and then you want to add the above method that we created. So this one, the create resource async, you want to call that, put sender as the parameter, dot access the async action function. And then you should be good to go. Should be good to go. As long as you've done everything carefully, that should be everything. I've done it all in the main page file, just for simplicity's sake, sort of thing. And as you saw at the beginning of the video, that was the output. That was the result. You get the bitmap graphic on the screen. So that was utilizing Win2D abstractions in order to do what we just did just now, because the canvas control is actually a class that depends on the Win2D assembly. It comes from that, and which leads me to another thing. You need to download. I'm really sorry I didn't mention this. I'll see if I can put like a timestamp earlier in the video. Prerequisite: you need to download Win2D via the NuGet store. So let me see if I can just demonstrate that. Oh, hold on. Yeah. Let me just make sure this is right. Yeah. So Win2D.UWP. You want to download this via NuGet. Otherwise, everything I showed you just won't work. So in case you're there wondering what's going on, this is what you need. Win2D.UWP. You can find that in NuGet. Let's go back. So now I want to shift your attention to another method of doing the same thing effectively. However, there is a bit of a discrepancy, should I say, with the results. If I go to my sprites class, I attempted to actually do the same thing using nothing but the Windows.graphics imaging namespace, which is like a native namespace that comes out of the box with UWP. And the thing is, I I was 99% there really. But the issue I found, and maybe I'm gonna leave the source code in the description. If any of you can figure this out before I do, definitely feel free to leave in the comments. But it's not a hard thing, because it's not really a code-based issue. Basically, what I'm doing here, I'm creating a bitmap, or a software bitmap. I'm then loading I'm creating this kind of stream object, which then reads the file and then it parses it as a bitmap. The issue is, the limitations of this approach is that you can only adhere to the BGRA8 pixel format standard. I'll see if I can put a picture on the screen of the documentation that goes through this. And the bitmap alpha mode has to be pre-multiplied. So if you do a little bit of research, this is not really within the realms of like utilizing UWP per se, but it's more to do with standards to do with image standards, and how the alpha values and RGB values blend with digital images. So this is limited to just the BGRA8 standard and a pre-multiplied alpha mode, which I couldn't figure out how to make the image you saw at the beginning of the video pre-multiplied, even though I ran it through a convert function, which comes under software bitmap. I still couldn't get it to work, and I don't know why. I will leave the source code. If any of you can figure it out, definitely let me know. Say in the comments. It's probably an easy fix, because there's two approaches. You can either make this convert function work, or you can just make sure your image adheres to the standard. But then again, you're limited again to the fact that you need a certain image in a certain file format. But then again, it is what it is. So with that in mind, I definitely I lean towards the Win2D approach to this as a solution. So this now brings me to the part of the video where I want to talk a little bit about UWP. I'll just spend a couple minutes just to kind of go over my thoughts on UWP, in that it does get a lot of bad rep. Excuse me. UWP does get a lot of bad rep in the media and amongst the community. However, I feel that because of a lot of poor housekeeping, or what is essentially obscure errors that we don't know how to deal with, we find ourselves in a situation where we're put off the platform. Microsoft may have also found themselves stretching themselves a little bit too thin, trying to appease all these platforms as a unified kind of generalization, in that you make one application and it runs across the stack. Now, although that's ideal on paper, it does come with its inherent challenges to create as a reality. But the advantages are starting to show. With some of the namespaces and the support with DirectX that UWP actively engages with, I think is a really good advantage, and is a very attractive point to develop on UWP as a platform. So those are some of the advantages I believe in developing on UWP. You have the cross-platform support, and it's also really easy to integrate your app into onto the Windows Store. It's almost a native functionality to be able to just deploy and ship your app. It's a lot more easier than it is for UWP. UWP is a little bit more trickier to convert your application to an APPX package, which I've tried in the past. There were some issues and stuff like that. And UWP seems to have functionality built in to the editor in order to just kind of do that as smoothly as possible. There was another thing I was going to talk about regarding that point. I can't really remember anymore. But yeah, so shipping and deployment is quite simple. And yeah, UWP as a platform is still being supported. So those are my thoughts on UWP. Some of the drawbacks, obviously, it's still not on its strongest footing. It's still kind of buggy in places. There's a lot of obscure errors that you have to kind of get into to kind of solve. You have to avoid certain older frameworks that are not 100% compatible with UWP. And so with that being said, yeah, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this quite what's the one I'm looking for? Educational. And feel free to leave a like, subscribe, leave your feedback as well. You know, what can be improved, what is fine, what you enjoyed, and see if you can figure out that the source code for the second method of rendering the bitmap. It'd be good to see what you come up with. Thank you so much. My name is Will. Have a great day. Bye bye.